Freakiness is a part of life. Original Barramangan along with the two bad, wicked youths of rap. God mercy, whoa.
What's the business? Talk paper when I'm riding by. They know it's drizzle, he the truth off the east side. I know who ain't got my money because they ducking high. I grind for me and mine. I got the green light. I got to get it how I live it. That means front line. I got the zips, I got that soft, I got that hard white.
Oh, what up? Let me get my design going. Okay, how's everybody doing today? This is Jeem. Oh, with the light. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you have not. Otherwise, you'll just be hurting my feelings. And I know that you guys don't want to do that. Now, do you? Probably not. So today we're going to be looking at a topic that I've covered before, but we're going to cover again. And that is going to be the topic of the state of Orthodoxy in Russia today. A few comments. We have Smigor, another Gene classic. Very nice. By the Misunderstood Bible, 2nd edition, by the book Flame, 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 from Nick TBR. Thank you very much, my friend. That is, of course, my published book, a work of massive scholarship and talent. It's not that great, but, you know, it's my book, so you should read it if you want to know what this channel is about. Man, I miss when they used to put cocaine in those. W. Jeem is a solid snake. Thank you. Jeem. All those accents like Jeem. Caravaggio says young Jimmy Eman. What's up? Urshman. Yo. Solid Snake. I'm looking forward to this episode. You don't need to look forward because it's live right now. I don't know what timeline you're living in. A Winged Editor 44, is Russia too secular and basically an evil dictatorship brutally suppressing anyone speaking against the poop? Well, yeah, I almost regret reading that one out. All right, so we're going to get a few topics that we have to look at within the milieu of reading about Russia. Pro tip, if you buy the book, you don't actually have to read it. Wow. I'm curious as to what you have in store for us tonight, Jim. Well, thank you for the smile emoji. All right, I'm going to share screen now with a few different things. We first got to talk about Putin and Kirill. Hold up. All right. So as we can see, we've got Putin and Kirill. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And there's some breaking news I need to tell you guys as well. So I'm going to read one or two more comments and then we have to get back into it. Nick says, surprisingly not, Russia still has a ton of ethnic minorities who are religious. Primate. When did Orthodox reach Russia? It depends. You know, Russia is a huge country and it wasn't always one country. So it reached Kiev and it reached Novgorod first. So those two areas were not quite one nation, but they were of similar people. The Novgorod dynasty of Russia, based more kind of on the Scandinavian origin. Of course, most Slavs are not pure Scandinavians, but that is what distinguishes them from the Kiev civilization, at least at this time period. So that's around near where Leningrad Oblast is today. That would be St. Petersburg. So there you go. This is too damn bright. Hang on. Ow. Oh. All right, it's not bad. So that's where that is today. And then you have Kiev, which is in Ukraine, but it was always part of the greater Kievan Rus dynasty. And so, you know, Orthodoxy began trickling in there in the 900s. People say Moscow is the third Rome, kind of weird. Well, if it is inheriting Byzantium, which Russians claim it does, or at least they used to before the Soviet time period. And if the Byzantine Empire is Rome number 2, because pagan Rome is gone, then yeah, Russia would be the third Rome if you're going to say it based on Orthodoxy. I know, I'm just messing with you, Snake. Completely off topic, says Smigor. But I figured I'd ask before the stream starts, have you read Matthew Pajot's Language of Creation? I've not. What's your opinion of the old believers? We'll get to them and why I think it's ironic that they exist. John Anon, looking forward to this. Glad I clicked over right at this minute to catch it live. Let's go. Well, my streams are about an hour to hour 20 minutes. Caravaggio, Trump and Putin talk recently. Hopefully we'll see peace soon. I'll pray for peace, but I don't know if I wouldn't get your bets up. Hello. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. I'm Eastern Orthodox from England, yeah? Well, great to have you here, Joseph. I went to a British school, so it's not cultural appropriation if I do that. Kind of third Rome. Others can claim it too, though. Zelensky did say he's willing to give up Kursk. I think Zelensky should just bite the bullet and give up all of the oblasts that Russia took over. Not because I'm Putin's biggest fan, but because there's no way in hell they're going to get them back. I'm sorry, in Hades. Can Orthodox bless weapons in Ukraine war? Seems immoral. They have, and I don't think it's appropriate for the Ukraine war because it's Orthodox killing Orthodox. But if it was an Orthodox war against a cult in India where they boil people alive, then yeah, you should definitely bless the weapons in that case. Are you good? You're Orthodox. Yes. Thank you. All right, let's get into it. So we have here Mr. Putin, Vladimir Putin, and Nick, it's actually not Australian. There are a lot of accents in England that don't sound like that Oxfordian British accent. So I was culture shocked when I went to a British private school in high school. It's where I went for school. That's right. I'm like one of those Upper East Siders, boys. But anyway, I went to the school and I thought everyone would be like Gandalf accent, and it's not. I scarcely heard a consonant on my first day. They're all from Birmingham or Norwich, from the north. All right. Anyway, let's get into it now. I think we've burned up the first 8.5 minutes. I won't be doing a cover of In Sync, to who asked the other time. Someone said, Jeem, the girls think you look pretty. Will you do an In Sync cover? I said no. I will, however, do Nirvana, only a couple songs though, because I don't like screaming into the mic that much in public. And Santana. Maybe we'll do that. And maybe Rolling Stones. All right. Yo, Gene, why do you delete so many videos like the DC Dawa clown refutation? I don't think I deleted that one. I'll check after. Anyway, last comment. What's your opinion on those 40K purity seals some priests were giving out? I don't even know what on earth you're talking about. Is that Warhammer 40K? Sakan the Salamander? Manchester, yeah. All right, so here's the problem. All right, we have Putin and we have Patriarch Kirill. So Kirill is the leader of the Moscow Patriarchate for the Orthodox Church. So remember, there's Orthodox Christianity, but there is no the Orthodox Church. So when people say you need to join the Orthodox Church, that does not exist. And that's actually a good thing. That's played to the strength of Orthodoxy throughout time. You'll see Catholics all the time talking about how, oh, you need the papal stuff because you need the top-down authority. That also means that corruption becomes instantaneous because it's top-down linear authority. Whereas in Orthodoxy, you could have Bulgaria, for instance, go off the walls and accept heresy and even leave the church, and it has essentially no impact on the rest of the Orthodox nations. It also means that if something happens in Russia, such as the communist revolution, that's not going to impact any nations that are not caught under that web. Unfortunately, the Iron Curtain did take the majority of Orthodox nations, but it didn't impact Greece, Cyprus, the Orthodox Christians living in the Middle East, diaspora, ROCOR, small amounts of missions in Africa at that time period, and maybe some minorities in Western Europe, such as the school in Paris. So the communist revolution couldn't impact them, and that was a great thing because they're decentralized. Because if they weren't decentralized, guys, then it would be as if communists took over Rome and the Vatican and went into the Vatican and installed a Vatican Pope, and then everybody just started doing or a communist pope. I mean, everybody just started doing red Catholicism. I mean, we already kind of have that in Latin America, and I just imagine that 10 times as bad and across the entire world. So thankfully, Orthodoxy is not top-down. So there is no the Orthodox Church. There's Orthodox Christianity. In Orthodoxy, what matters more than the authority of a governmental figure, which is what is the most important hallmark of Catholicism, do you obey the Pope? For Orthodoxy, unity means you believe in Orthodox theology. If you believe in Orthodox theology and you accept the sacraments and partake of them, you are Orthodox. It doesn't matter if you follow Kirill. You could follow no patriarchs that anyone's ever heard of. But if you agree with Orthodox Christianity, you are following Orthodox Christianity. You just won't be in a jurisdiction. But you'll be following that religion. Whereas in Catholicism, you must adhere to the Pope, the Papacy. So decentralization is good. Now, Jay Sharp asks a fascinating question. Can't you say the same for Prots, though? It's decentralized in a way. No, because Protestantism is the exact opposite of Papacy. So Papism is top-down authority, which means if you corrupt the Pope and corrupt the Vatican or whatever, it ruins everything else. Or rather, if the body of the Latin Church gets corrupted by Enlightenment deism, it's going to ruin the rest of Christianity. The problem with Protestantism is they weren't born in a vacuum. They came out of Catholicism. So already from day one, they're stuck with some of the suppositions of the Catholic Church, whether they like it or not. Number two, there's absolutely no integrity. And you can say you're a Protestant, and I don't know what that means. You could be an Arian. You could be a Messianic Jew. You could be a Calvinist. You could be a Socinian. You could be a Unitarian. You could be a Lutheran. So the only way that there's any unity within Protestantism is within the particular churches. To that extent, I would say there is no Protestant church. Of course, it's completely ridiculous. And there is even no Protestant theology. There are Protestant theologies, plural. So you can't combine Lutheran, Anglican, and all the different Reformed denominations into one, and then say, all of these combined are about the same size as Eastern Orthodoxy, therefore, I don't know, Orthodoxy debunked or something. You couldn't do that because the Reformed theology is not Lutheran theology, and Lutheran theology is not Anglican theology, even though they're kind of similar. That's not the case. So the Lutheran Church is one religion. The Reformed Church is a different religion. Then evangelicals are themselves about 5 different religions. Baptists are one religion. Non-denominationals are another religion. So far we have, 14 distinct Protestant religions. Not 40,000, but 14 religions. Whereas with Catholicism, there's one religion. Orthodoxy, there's one religion. Oriental Orthodoxy, there's one religion. If you adhere to that theology, you are part of that church. End of story. End of story. End of story. You're done. You're cooked. You're done. You're all done. All right, so I want to show, we have Kirill. Now, people think that Kirill and Putin are best buddies, and that's not the case. As we see here, I'll read out the caption for you. This is a telegram that I have a few friends in. Russian flag, Orthodox emoji. Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church speaks out against the multinational and multi-confessional agenda in Russia, which has been promoted by the state and by Putin himself. This comes amidst Russian normalization with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham terrorist regime.
Сказано в указе 809, цитирую, «Особая роль в становлении и укреплении традиционных ценностей принадлежит православию». И это ведь действительно так. И все же, несмотря на это, эти ценности не просто порой как бы попираются, но даже и перечеркиваются. Стыдливо затираются кресты на изображениях храмов и даже в государственной символике.
That's right.
Хотя стыдиться нужно не креста, а своего безродства и беспамятства. Как заклинание повторяют мысль о том, что Россия многонациональная и многоконфессиональная. И кто бы с этим спорил, если бы на практике эта формула не превращалась в попытку переформатировать наше государство в безнациональное и бесконфессиональное.
There you go. The patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, while not dissing Putin directly to his face, basically says that Russia is turning into, or at least has been since the 90s, a modern, slightly liberal, democratic state. No different than the United States. It just happens that Russians are a little more conservative. And so that's what Kirill is lamenting, the fact that Russia is like Mick Russia, all right? It's postmodern Russia. It's not Tsar Russia. It's not Orthodox Russia. It's Russia that happens to have Orthodoxy in it. It's a postmodern Russia that takes into account its Soviet and its Orthodox past. And that's not something that's acceptable to an Orthodox Christian. And so if there are any Muslims in the chat who are about to burst out of their pants, let me tell you something here, okay? It's the same exact thing that you're doing with Syria. You don't want the Sunni Syria to be just another secular mixed Syria country, do you? You want it to be a religious country that is a Sunni Muslim country, and if minorities live there, they have to respect Sunni Islam, or at least the fact that other people worship in that religion. Am I wrong? Because that's what all you guys want. And so this is exactly what an Orthodox would want for Russia too. We do not want Russia to be Mick Russia. We do not want Mick Moscow. We don't want Mick Orthodoxy. We don't want postmodern Russia. We don't want, you can be a Soviet in Russia. You cannot. It's over. You can honor the dead and the martyrs of the Soviet period who fought against a certain ideology from Europe. You cannot, however, hold to this ideology of communism. We can't see the subtitles. Oh, my bad. Well, I'm going to sum it up anyway. I don't know why you guys couldn't see that. Anyway, really, all he said was what I had summed up in the text. So in the text where it said Patriarch Kirill slams the multi-confessional stuff, that's all he said. It just took him like 45 seconds to say it. So Kirill basically says, we don't want a multi-confessional government. We don't like the fact that we can't put crosses in our government buildings and our official trademarks of Russia. That's all he said. Sorry if you missed that. But yes, there is no Mick Russia. So Kirill is not a Soviet puppet. It's clear Orthodoxy in Russia is not supposed to be Soviet. There's probably some people with Soviet sympathies. If anybody's commanding a Soviet aesthetic into Russia, it would actually be Putin, who has to balance Orthodox Christians, Soviet boomers and grandmas from the Soviet period, Tatars and Turkic groups, Chechens, Dagestanis, liberals. He has to combine all of them. So that's what Putin is doing. And so it's inaccurate to say that, number one, Putin is the patriarch of the church. He's not. And number two, for you to then say Kirill is communist himself, because he's not. I don't know. It's hard on these boys who think that Russia is like this demon-infested hellhole, because it's not. Give me 1 second. I got to pull up a sauce really quick. Pull up a sauce that I made. Let me see if I can do it. Where are you? Ah, here we go. Hey, Lois, I got a map. All right, let me see if I can share this tab. So, okay, I produced this map. No, the Soviets did Platonism. Sorry. So I'm going to put myself into here so you can kind of see. This is a map Gene crafted. So if you take a look at this map here, I divided it into 60 to 80% Orthodox, 45 to 60% Orthodox, 30 to 45%, 20 to 30%, 10 to 20%, and then the gray areas are just less than 10%, so basically either a non-Christian area or totally atheist area. Then the green is just like 98% Muslim with barely any Orthodox minorities, and the green with the stripes in it, the kind of weirdish greenish blue aqua color, is like a Muslim area that's like maybe 80 or 70% Muslim with Orthodox. I wish I could watch, but I'm at work. Well, thanks anyway for $4.99 super chat USD, Luke. Always an awesome help. So yeah, check out this cartography right here. As you can see, first of all, before people get dismayed and say, oh, that's so tiny, the map of Russia is so huge, look at the white areas of Russia that I colored white. These are massive parts of Russia that nobody lives in. So it doesn't matter if those parts are atheist, right? If Krasnoyarsk, or whatever the huge one is called, is only 20% Orthodox, that doesn't matter because it's got like a population of 2 million people, but it's larger than all of Europe, including Scandinavia and the British Isles. So where can we find that map? You have a Twitter. You can find it in the video that I'm showing you right now. I'll put it on my Twitter if you want, though. So those areas don't count, right? Russia's a huge country. It's got a population of only 148 million or so. So these areas are too huge to really matter at all. As you can see, the further into Asia you go, the less Orthodox it is. Now, somebody's going to say, oh, that means Russia didn't evangelize. That's not quite true. It's just that the parts in Russia that are more Asian are sparsely populated, and most of the population there are not ethnic Russians, number one. Number two, they actually got heavily Sovietized harder than European Russia, believe it or not. It's like European Russia, even though that's where all the action is taking place, the western parts of Russia where everybody lives, Orthodoxy was able to have a larger presence there because so many people lived there. When you get to the Asian parts, they basically had a really bad quality of life. Not bad per se, but just, behind the times, not very modern or demure way of life, as they say. And when they got Sovietized, it was very easy for them to wipe out any vestiges of Orthodoxy. And that little nugget over there is actually called Jewland. I'm not even kidding. It's literally just called Jewish Zone. Originally, Stalin wanted to put all of the Yahud here, but that didn't work out. As you can see, the majority of what we call religious Russia is going to be the Caucasus, and that includes Muslims and Orthodox Christians. The areas south and a little southwest and a little southeast surrounding Moscow. This dark dot there is Moscow. And then up there is Leningrad Oblast, so that's St. Petersburg. Those are the most religious parts of Russia. Now, the other parts aren't 0%. They're anywhere from 30 to 45%. That's still pretty substantial, because in Russia, people don't say they're Orthodox, really, unless they actually identify with it. It's not like, you're in Norway and everybody says that they are part of the Lutheran Church or whatever, but they don't actually do it. So do you understand, guys? Do you understand the difference here? If you look up a census of Norway, it's going to say 98% Lutheran, but nobody gives a rat's shit about Lutheranism there. Whereas in Russia, you have to at least identify with it. Doesn't mean you pray every day or go to liturgy every week. That's another thing I've noticed. If you look at global Orthodoxy, going to church often is actually not a sign of being religious. There's a lot of people, and I would say, dare I say, even the plurality or majority of Orthodox don't go to church every single week, but they would still consider themselves to be religious. And that's because Orthodoxy is not as legalistic as Catholicism. Now, you shouldn't miss liturgy, but it's not like, oh, you missed liturgy, you lost your salvation now. Like, I had my salvation 8 minutes ago, and then an anime porn profile picture showed up on Twitter, and my salvation's gone. Like, we don't believe in that. Like, there's not like this Thomistic stuff, which I don't know how they reconcile that with double predestination, but whatever, that's a topic for another time. So that's my map of Russia. The source is literally, I just made it one day when I was bored. What else did I want to show you guys? I have been to this church here, Christ the Savior Church. I don't know why it's all the way over there. In Moscow itself, gorgeous church. And so a personal anecdote for me would simply be when I when I was in Russia for about a month and a half, I noticed that people did not go to the big churches outside of liturgy. Now, it's kind of a no-brainer. Outside of liturgy, people aren't going to really be going to the churches, you might say. So that doesn't really prove anything. I wasn't really ever going to liturgy. I was younger back then and kind of an agnostic, and I don't know, I always respected Christianity. That's the thing. Like, even when I was an agnostic, I always felt like, hey, I believe in God. I just wasn't religious. I don't know how I did that in my mind, but whatever. So the thing is that, I didn't go to these liturgies, so I can't tell you what was up with that. But I can tell you that Russia has a shortage of churches, and sometimes they build churches in urban areas, but not in the rural areas. So a lot of rural Russians might say, yeah, I never go to church. They can't. There might be one church for 25,000 people. They're all going to go to that church on Sunday. Like, these churches are small, most of them. They're not as grand as this one here. So the big opulent churches are going to be in Moscow and St. Petersburg and the areas around it. They're not going to be in the rural areas and the villages and even just the suburban areas around the city that people actually need them in. So that's one reason why there's a low church attendance in Russia, in addition to the fact that I don't think Orthodoxy measures itself by how often you go to church. Another thing is I went to a monastery. Okay? I went to a monastery that was outside of Moscow. And it was really weird because I was there on a school trip. When I was there for a month, basically, I was there on a school trip. It was a really big trip. I don't even know why it took that long. But anyway, we were there and we went to a monastery, which surprised me because it was a very atheist school that I was in. And I saw some real devotion there. I saw old women in veils praying and bowing and prostrating. I saw men. I didn't see like teenagers, but I did see 20 to 30-year-old men. I saw old men. Okay? So if you guys understand that, like, I was there. I saw this stuff. So nobody can tell me that there are not devout people in Russia. I was there for a month. Most of the guys who are shitting and dunking on Russia have never been to Russia. They've never been anywhere east of New Jersey. I've never been to this church, but I went to Christ the Savior, St. Basil's. I went to that huge one. Forget the name of it. Massive one with the pillars in St. Petersburg. What's the name of that one? Let me pull it up now. Why is it showing St. Basil's? I said St. Petersburg. It's total not. Dude, Google is total garbage now. There we go. It's not going to tell me the name of it. And it's a low quality garbage image. This is nonsense. Ah, there it is. I went to this one too, Kazan Cathedral. Absolutely breathtaking. I was here. Again, I walked into these churches at noon. There were some people lighting candles. It wasn't liturgy, so nobody was really there. But the monastery was full. In the middle of the weekday, no liturgy was happening. And it wasn't just monks. It was dudes in jeans and sneakers who looked like they just got there. People take the bus to go to monasteries outside of Moscow. And that's Moscow, which is considered to be less religious, ironically, than St. Petersburg, previously known as Leningrad. Father Joseph Swaden of the True Orthodox Church says, "For the record, I lived in Russia 2 years. Two crooks. The thing with the Caucasians and Central Asians in the USSR was that even though the commies saw them as backwards and needing uplifting." Oh, was that the commies? Yeah. So Marxism thought modern Western nations go socialist first. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, guys. My church is filled with teens. Okay. Yeah. 5 words. Putin is a modern Mick-Russian leader. He's not trad, ortho, bro, czar. But Patriarch Kirill is actually against Putin's idea of multi-confessional Russia. So I don't think Patriarch Kirill is a Putin plant because he disagrees with Putin's ideas. That's basically the thesis. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to go to something slightly different. But yeah, I think you guys understand my point here in that you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't judge Russia by what ortho bro types say on the internet. It's kind of delusional. You also can't portray Russia the way of, oh, this Z primate, the Ukrainian guys who hate Russia. That's also not true. There are religious parts of Russia, and I showed a map showing that the Caucasus and the areas around Moscow are all 70% Orthodox. But then the areas in between Moscow and Leningrad Oblast are more secular. Leningrad Oblast is about half-half. The far north and then the far east of Russia is pretty much atheist, which again, nobody lives there, so who cares? Now we need to come to old Pete. I gotta get a good picture of old Pete here. I've used this image before, but it's just so good that I have to use it again. This guy is so in love with himself. Actually, we'll do this one instead. This guy is so in love with himself, I just can't. I can't do it. All right, we're gonna do the Bronze Horseman, the Apocalypse, Peter the Great. So if you look here, this is Peter the Great, Peter the Gay, more like. And if you know anything about him, I've done multiple streams where I mention it. So I don't know. Hey, sharing for improvement. You don't need the sarcasm here. But yeah, I do. That is what I hold to. This is Peter the Great meditating and deciding to craft his master plan. And if you see anything about Peter the Great and Catherine, they try to modernize Russia. So Father Joseph, if you'd like to pop on, I'm going to put in the link in a moment. You're free to do so. So that's it. We'll have, if you want to discuss Russia. But yeah, Peter the Great and Catherine, but especially Peter, they really did Latin captivity on Russia. The people always smacking on Romanides. It's Greek, but the Greece was never Latin captivity. This is the thing. Somebody asked me about the Old Believers not long ago. Somebody asked about the Old Believers. But the Old Believers came into being because they were against the Latinization of the Greek and Bulgarian churches, and they thought Russians were copying that. So they went ballistic and created the Old Believer denomination. You understand? With me so far? Ironically, Russia becomes more Latinized than Greece. That's right. I will proclaim that. Not all of Russia, but the urban areas, especially the areas around Leningrad Oblast, they, okay, if you don't want to come on, that's fine. The areas around Leningrad Oblast, they do not have this super Eastern Russian theology. They don't. They're not following the patristic theology. Why? Because of Peter the Great. It's not just Leningrad Oblast, but just the northern part of Russia, which is ironically the most atheist and secular part today. They got modernized the quickest before the Soviet period. So if someone says, wait, Gene, you're contradicting yourself. Didn't you say the Asian parts of Russia got Sovietized? Yes, I am saying the Asian parts got Sovietized more effectively than the European parts. We're not talking about the Soviets here. We're talking about the pre-Soviet Enlightenment figures, Peter the Great. And so Peter the Great brought a lot of that baggage of Protestantism, Jesuitism under Catherine, so Catholicism, Protestantism, modernism into the Orthodox Church. And so that deviated from the patristic theology. So when Romanides is saying, oh, the Russians are not following proper theology, remember, he's writing this stuff in the 70s and 80s when the Soviet Union was still there. So Romanides is correct. Father John Romanides, he's correct to say the Russians are not following proper theology because they were under the boot of communism. And before that, they were under a century of Enlightenment modernism. So it's true. They did deviate. Doesn't mean that we're doing, Aryan Judaism and Catholic Latin Mass, but just they had deviated some of their beliefs. And maybe the style in which they portrayed themselves as Orthodox. So there you go. Improvement, I myself am being sarcastic to you. So I'm just doing like a 2D layer joke, 3D joke. This is my bad, Gene. I didn't mean to appear sarcastic. I'm thanking you for your insights and just sharing with everyone else these important differences and that Kirill is not a Putin puppet. Yeah, that's true. Wasn't the Soviet Union were highly racist? No. I don't know how they could be. Yeah, there were racist people in the Soviet Union, but the ideology of Marxism is dialectic of class, not dialectic of race. So if anybody's racist in the Soviet Union, that's just because it's just old nonsense that they didn't get rid of during communism. Dialectic of race was the National Socialists in Germany. Okay, the guy with the mustache. That's dialectic of race. Dialectic of class was Marxism. So they were classists. They weren't racist. I mean, they probably were racist too, but I'm just saying, like, their main thing was classism. Batman Beyond, our Greek from the land down under, says, I studied Peter the Great for history projects. He did a lot of modernist reforms of the law and restricted the church / traditions and influence in politics / state customs. Yeah, he got that from Napoleon. Is it okay to be Rokor? Yeah, I'm not dunking on Russian Orthodoxy. I'm just saying that from the time period of Peter all the way through the communist time, Russia was under the boot of modernism. Doesn't mean there were zero believers there. It just means that there were some people who deviated. It would be foolish to say you can't be Russian Orthodox. They're like, what? The country of Russia alone is like 45% of the Orthodox Christian population. So there you go. Well, anyway, Father Swaydon, let me know if you want to join. Stalin forced everyone to speak Russian. But Stalin himself was not Russian, so I don't know what that's all about. The Velam monks sent to Alaska in 1794, including St. Herman. Yeah, there was good done in these periods, guys. Don't be like, oh, Peter showed up and, World of Warcraft phased everybody into the demon zone. Like, there's still going to be good stuff that happens in bad times. But generally, he modernized Russia. Whereas Greece didn't really get super modernized until maybe the early 1900s. So the Russian modernism started in the time of Peter. Yeah, they were racist against people that were seen as barbarians. But at the same time, the Soviets did a lot of propaganda saying, hey, we stand with our African brothers and stuff against evil European imperialism, which was really, really clever marketing propaganda from the Soviets, because they also did imperialism, but they marketed it as anti-imperial imperialism, dialectical imperialism. See, it's like imperialism, but it's actually the exact opposite, but it's also the same thing. All right, I'm going to pin this. You guys are free to join. The lecture is over. I was going to do one just called The State of Orthodoxy in the World, Then I realized I'm wasting the potential here of doing like 5 streams. And I'm actually going to do one on each country. I'm going to do the state of Orthodoxy in the Patriarchate of Antioch. So that means my tribe, Syrian, Lebanese, etc., Christians. I'll also include Turkey in that, even though that's EP Constantinople. Then we're going to do Jerusalem, and then we're going to do Romania, Georgia. Greece is going to be really, really important one because Greece is going to include all this weird Helen versus Romoi stuff. So this is going to be huge. All right, what do we got here? To Crook, I will let you on, and then I'm going to let on Father Joseph Swade on because he doesn't have that much time. So you just, Crook, you just stay here while we let on Father Swade on.
Yeah,
how's it going?
Good. He can go first while I can wait and go after him.
Okay, I'm going to increase your volume a bit. You seem a little quieter today.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe it's just me. I'm in a loud room. Hello.
Greetings. God bless you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Have you enjoyed the stream so far?
Yeah, no, I think I'm very much on point. I would probably only disagree with about the Patriarch Kirill part, but only partially.
Okay. So what did you want to discuss? I was only in Russia for about 3 weeks. You said you lived there 2 years. What parts of Russia did you live in?
St. Petersburg.
Very nice. So what did you want to share about this?
It's complicated. It's one thing that we have to understand is that no matter how we're looking at it, there were when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, literally there were, between the organized crime and the number of Western powers that moved into just completely abuse these people. It went from, atheistic communism to materialistic capitalism in overnight. And that has psychological effects on people. That said, there were a lot of movements, a lot of religious movements at the time that were all vying for power, and the Moscow Patriarchate was, of course, the largest of these. So, yeah, it's a complicated period, but we have to remember that the people, went through a lot. Not all of it is alien to us. A lot of the things we complain about in the West affect them in Russia as well. So it's a complicated situation, and everyone's trying to rebuild. So that's kind of that was all I had to say. But overall, I think you were right on the money, even though you spent considerably less time there. You still picked up on the realities of the situation there.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I showed that video on Telegram, even though unfortunately the subtitles weren't there, but I explained that it was basically Patriarch Kirill in like a 45-second video trying to dunk on Putin's idea of multi-confessional Russia. What do you think of Kirill's statement there? He's breaking a little bit away from this image that he's like attached to Vladimir Putin. What do you think of that?
It's one thing that is true is that a lot of people in Russia have, even in the time of Patriarch Alexei, saw the Moscow Patriarchate as basically an arm of the state. So I don't know how much a 45-second video is going to affect years-long held prejudices, etc. That said, one can argue that the Moscow Patriarchate is not nearly as committed to Orthodox purity as opposed to interconfessionalism themselves, especially since Kirill himself was the chief ecumenist of the Moscow Patriarchate before his election. That's I keep saying that said, but there's so many qualifiers that you have to go through when you're talking about it. It's an incredibly complex subject. I forget if it was yesterday or someplace else. There was a commentary between Patriarch Kirill and a priest of West Ukrainian extraction. I don't know if you saw that one, where basically the priest accuses Patriarch Kirill of being a shill for war, and Patriarch Kirill brings up his ethnicity and says, maybe you should watch yourself. Like, to me, that is not exactly statesman-like. It's a little closer to gangster-like. But, unfortunately, this is the reality that we live in. And it is one that in Russia is, it's acute. I spent my time in Russia. At that time, I was going to ROAC parishes. And the ROAC was the successor of the Free Russian Church, which popped up in 1990. And so I've mentioned it, publicly now, but a few times. But the point is that I would go to a church in Sustal, a cathedral in Sustal that was hundreds of years old, and I can't explain the complexities real fast. But basically, how it worked was this: when the Soviet Union fell, basically the Russian state basically said, okay, someone's got to take care of these churches. So the Moscow Patriarchate and catacomb groups and other groups were all racing to the offices with paperwork to show that they were the legitimate owners of these buildings. And so to find myself worshiping in a large cathedral with hundreds of people in joyful celebrations, only to return to America a year later, and then 2 years later, that building's just taken away and turned into a tourist station, is horrifying. So it's complicated. It's not easy. I think you're spot on about a number of things. Of course, ever since what's funny is I used to be very critical of Peter the Great, but the more I see how many people attack Peter the Great, the more I really want to defend Peter the Great, because he's got some good things going for him, and he was an Orthodox czar, whether we like his comedy troupe or not. Yeah. So yeah, that was all I had to say. But I figured unless you had questions for me, etc.
Well, I was going to say, we have actually a comment in here. Elijah Hallberg is saying that Greece was Latinized in the 17th century, and that it's Greece's fault that Russia got Latinized. I still think that people tend to overlook the idolization of Protestantism in that time period, which bled into like the northwest part of Russia. I think Greece, or the Peter's kind of affinity for Scandinavian Protestantism, was more of a modernizing force in Russia in that time period.
I tend to see the Latinization, for lack of a better word, if you want to call it the pseudomorphosis, etc., as Florovsky called it. I see that as really enhancing the Catholicity of the church in future eras, because the pre-Petrine Russia and the I don't know when the Latin captivity would be in Greece exactly, but the point is, before these things, the Latin West was largely unknown to these parties. By the 19th century, you're seeing bishops writing in Latin and addressing and using pre-schism Western saints. As a matter of fact, few people, even though you're familiar, I'm sure, with the whole mess regarding the liturgy of St. Tikhon and the Russian observations on the American Prayer Book. But if you notice, those bishops are citing Western pre-schism documents in Latin to make the points of what was wrong with the BCP. So that's a really impressive thing, and that would not be expected of a bishop in the 16th century in Russia.
So if you don't mind, I just want to interject to explain that to the audience. So what Father Swedon is saying here is basically that before this so-called Latin captivity, as a lot of people will dramatically call it, essentially Orthodoxy was self-contained. But if you guys know history, the Balkans, Greece included, was under the domain of the Ottomans. So there wasn't a lot of, what's the rest of the world up to? They had no idea. As for Russia, they were just ravaged by the Mongols and Tatars. So again, they weren't like having conferences with Teutonic theologians. But we have a host of pre-schism Western saints and theologians. So that's before 1054, St. Augustine being one of them, who's usually dogpiled on by a lot of people online. And so it's foolish to say, hey, Orthodoxy, the schism basically began in the 200s, and anybody who's Western is garbage. That's how a lot of people tend to accidentally portray themselves. But it is, as you're saying, a good thing they were at least able to address papal claims and Catholic theology using the same Latin sources as the Catholics, instead of being ignorant of it. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, that's I think a great boon, especially because if the Orthodox Church is going to be the church, then it can't be like, hey, we don't care about anything Western for the first 1,000 years. That's a pretty big mistake to make.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, and that was my point. Is that in the future struggles of Orthodoxy, that is going to be invaluable.
Definitely. And then one last thing would be, you said you disagreed on, I think I only mentioned ROCOR in passing. What was your objection to ROCOR? I heard that there were, the two questions. We'll start with the ROCOR thing. What would be your objection to what happened to ROCOR and where its place is today?
Well, I didn't quite catch that part of the stream. I do jump from stream to stream, so I'm not sure exactly what you were referencing, but I'll be glad to answer the
Nothing.
question.
I just said, someone said, "Can I be Rokor?" I said, "I don't see. What would be the difference between that and the Moscow Patriarchate at this point?"
Well, I mean, I would advise if a person does see that distinction, that they could. There are continuing Rokor groups, the Rokor Agafangel, the Rokor, the Artok. There's quite a few, even in this country. There's probably, say, somewhere around 50 confessing Rokor parishes that never joined.
And what's your opinion on it overall? Like, are there problems in the last? I think there was a stream of yours I watched a while ago where you said Rokor had been altered at some point. It's not as the same as it was when it initially broke off of Moscow during I'm assuming during the Stalinist times.
It didn't break off of Moscow. It was the remaining Russian bishops who were outside Russia from the pre-revolutionary church.
Right,
so
right. By break off, I meant
most people understand on our side of the story, the divide. Most people understand the Moscow Patriarchate as having been invented by Stalin in 1943.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, I think what else was I going to ask? Oh, there was some news that the old believers in Alaska had joined. I think the Moscow Patriarchate. Is that correct? Recently?
I don't pay too much attention, but I did hear that. It was, I think, like 2 parishes or something. Again, I don't respect old believers in general. Outside of the Indino Veri, who tried to stick by the church's tradition, most of the old believers in Russia and throughout the world are crazy heretics. I don't recognize them at all.
Yeah, I think it's caught on semi-popularity, like just online. But I think if you actually read the history and at least what they are, especially today, I don't see why somebody should be launching themselves into joining that group.
I think it's just that what it comes down to is it's the purity spiral, and we've seen that a million times, and people always jump on that, and I think it's kind of silly. But unfortunately, I usually see people like that as unserious, and sometimes they get serious, and sometimes they don't.
I agree, definitely. Well, thank you very much for calling in today. Appreciate it.
No problem, Gene. God bless you.
You too. All right, 2 Crooks. I didn't really give you a chance to talk, so I'll let you talk before we let Mr. James in. How's it going?
It's all good. It's all good, Jim. After all, I come on a lot here, so nothing too lost. But in regards to Russia and Christianity, I feel when many Orthobros like to hold up Russia as this based Orthodox nation, I personally think it's very similar to how many tankies or hardcore Marxist-Leninists like to hold up China as this based communist nation, when in reality both modern Russia and post-reform China are still pretty, I guess you could say, liberal nations, because their main interests are, after all, appeasing their oligarchs, appeasing their CEOs through any sort of means. And a lot of their actions tend to be motivated by economics and finances. After all, you just played the patriarch talking about Syria, and I do believe that if this new HTS government decides, hey, maybe we do want some Russians in here after all to balance out the Turks, and we'll give them the port, Russia would probably do that. Say, forget you, Assad, we're securing the Mediterranean once again. However, one thing I will say is that I personally like to see Russians and Orthodoxy, and I'm talking about the average Russian here, they see Orthodoxy as part of their culture, but, it's not hyper traditionalist. I'd compare it to how a lot of Protestant Americans, like in the Deep South, could see being Baptist as part of their culture, but they're not as traditionalist as they like to make themselves out to be. They're still primarily focused on America as a nation, the way many of these Russian Orthodox Christians are focused on Russia as a nation. You get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. So there's definitely an element of cultural orthodoxy, and that's this is what the distinction is. What is better? Is it better for somebody who claims they're super religious but they're totally liberal, or is it better to have a conservative person who's just kind of culturally orthodox? At the end of the day, they're both kind of wrong, but you can't just say, well, so and so is more religious. I mean, I don't know if that's a victory. It depends if they're following the proper religion. So there are a lot of culturally orthodox Russians, but again, I would point out that people who over dramatize it and act like Russia's an atheist country, I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
There
Yeah,
are
that's
some real believers there.
Yeah, that's definitely wrong too. The same way how everyone talks about, oh, America is this godless nation, it's the great Satan. No, there are plenty of religious Americans. That's just
I
not
agree.
a, yeah, arguing that they've completely given themselves over to materialism is just wrong. It's just that at the same time, you can't really escape modernity, especially if you're a great power nation with a lot of invested economic interests and a lot of interests in keeping that power. So you end up kind of putting your country at the center of your beliefs, no matter how much you want to try and escape it. And part of not escaping modernity is, I hate to get stereotypical, but a lot of these American Protestants and Russian Orthodoxies, they kind of seem to get a lot of their sermons on social media, believing these weird ass conspiracies, sometimes AI generated, and they think, oh, they're this base trad guy saving the world from modernity. But dude, your religious beliefs and theologies are all coming from WhatsApp forward groups. So what am I supposed to say?
I definitely agree with that. First of all, thank you, Orthodox Boomer Grandma, for the $9.99 USD super chat. She says, second time watching, great discussion. Thank you. Thank you as well for the donation. But yeah, thing is, I do think the decentralization, like I said earlier, of Orthodoxy is a strength. And so, yeah, you might have some of these like culturally Orthodox guys who aren't that, theologically minded or religious at least. And, while that's not perfect, it does at least put some kind of patriotism. So the people who are patriotic are going to end up gravitating towards some kind of Orthodox identity. Whereas if you had, a completely top-down area, a lot of countries that are nominally Catholic don't see Catholicism as like part of the national identity. Some do, some don't. A lot of them don't anymore. But with Orthodoxy, it's still there. And so it kind of gives, Russian Orthodoxy is its own flavor, which is distinct from Greek Orthodoxy. Same theology, but it's different flavor. I think that's a good thing. So I would say that there's, benefits and costs.
Exactly.
But yeah, internet stuff is definitely kind of
Yeah, but I just said the reason why I made the comparison to America specifically, and maybe China, if we were to focus on China having their own set of traditions, but they have to balance out with modernity or whatever, or China's just more far gone.
I don't like those traditions. So there, that's
yeah, but you get what I mean. We're a great power nation. We're all addicted to our phones and our screens. You can't escape that. Whereas I think for more middle nations or something, such as Georgia, Armenia, I'd say they're a bit more traditionalist, but I think that's because for them, they see keeping on to their traditions as a means of resisting the modern world, which they see as controlled by America, Russia, and China, trying to shove stuff down their throat.
Yeah. A lot of it's also the fact that the Western Enlightenment powers have been the powers for the last 300 years. If that wasn't the case, then maybe being modern and powerful wouldn't go hand in hand with being liberal. But at the time being, it is, because Enlightenment powers have been the powers for the last 3 centuries. Stay on the line, Two Crooks. I'm just going to let Mr. James in here. Hello, James. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. What would you like to discuss?
Well, first I just want to leapfrog on what TC was saying with the, the whole national identity angle. Like, from looking into it myself, like the whole nationalism stuff, that's like a post-Enlightenment, like French Revolutionary like thing, right? And yeah, but I feel like we have to play ball with the seculars in regard to this, right? So, when we discuss the differences between like the Greeks or the Russians, right? Instead of talking about the fullness of the same theology, we go into arguing about, oh, Kirill is influenced by the KGB. He was wearing an expensive watch, right? Or, oh, Bartholomew, he was, preaching ecumenism and he's influenced by NATO and globalism. It's like, on that level, you would think it's kind of unavoidable for these like big influential leaders that, they have to engage with the world a little bit,
Yeah. They can't just be like, I'm going to live in the 1100s. They do have to play real politics. So it might just be that some of the statements that Bartholomew and Kirill make are just statements, and then nothing really happens. So we can't tell 100%.
Yeah, but like something I've seen, I'm a catechumen, by the way. Like something I see with like my fellow like catechumens is like focusing on the hierarchs and like what they're doing wrong, right? When it's like you should really just focus on your own like community, your own priests. Like that's the beauty of the whole decentralized synodal system, right?
Definitely.
Because it should auto-correct itself, right? Let's say Bartholomew goes too far with like saying friendly statements towards what have you, like appealing to degenerate Western values, or Kirill is obviously like selling out the Russian people for whatever oligarchies. Like you would think the other bishops below them, that doesn't mean they're also corrupt. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And as again, I'm going to mention Romanides just because he's so controversial, it gets people upset. And yes, I will talk about this guy in 1 second. Orthodoxy is supposed to be therapeutic, so you really should be focusing on yourself. Like, buckle your seatbelt before you help the guy next to you. I mean, that's kind of the whole point. And because we don't have a papacy, an infallible vicar of God's power on earth, we don't have to worry about some guy getting corrupt. And here's an example. This is Cyril Lucaris. He was the patriarch of Constantinople. He was the patriarch of Alexandria before that. He was a straight-up Calvinist. He was an iconoclast. He believed in double predestination, supralapsarianism. He just rejected a lot of the patristic Eastern Orthodox theology. And he was the patriarch of Constantinople, I think in the 13 or 1400s, I think. Or maybe it was earlier than that. I just read a book, and he was mentioned a few times. 1500s, yeah. So he was between the 1500s and the early 1600s. He was the leader of Constantinople, and he was a Calvinist. And so Orthodoxy didn't just get debunked and everybody died on that day. It continued, and this guy was just, all of his writings were basically just, hey, he was wrong, and now let's move on. He's not the infallible emissary of God.
Yeah, and I say that's the Roman Catholics about, wasn't it, I might get it wrong, it's the Pope Viral, right? He was a Latin patriarch in the first 1,000 years of the church that sort of went astray. He was condemned by the other four.
I think so. Yeah, I got to brush up on a lot of my.
Yeah. So like basically, like we see this even with like what modern Roman Catholics will call the Papacy, right? Like they think it's supreme and infallible. Meanwhile, we can point to examples of the Roman Pope getting it wrong, right? Like completely wrong, and it, wait until you tell them about there being other Petrine sees. They don't understand it. Anyways, that's all I really wanted to deposit was the idea that it's not really our place to be like, because we don't know what's going on in that high level, right? We have to have faith in the other bishops around them, right? And so it's like, I wish Kirill could be a better representative. Same thing with Bartholomew, but that's just not my place. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's also, again, like historically, there's been worse. It's like people have this weird idea that like, oh, in the old days, everybody did everything perfectly, and now we got this like rats, vermin, excrement, garbage going on where everybody doesn't understand theology properly. It's like, no, there's been a lot of times. There's been some times where, patriarchs acquiesced too much to the Ottoman power. It doesn't mean that suddenly Orthodoxy became Turkish Muslim. So it's just,
it's a very naive and purity spiraling mindset, right? It's naive to think, at that level, geopolitics don't play a role and stuff,
I agree.
Anyway.
I agree fully. Thank you for that.
All right, I'm on bounce. Take it easy.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for calling in, James.
One more thing, I just want to get James.
He's gone.
Yeah, but just in case he's still listening, in regards to the whole influence by the KGB thing, I always find that to be a really unfair statement because the KGB and in other countries, like the Stasi in East Germany, those were unavoidable. You couldn't really just not be influenced by them growing up. So the point is people change, and sometimes it takes witnessing the fall of an institution. And Jim, why are you making finger guns at me? Oh no.
Because that's what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just...
Yeah.
Oh, he was influenced by the KGB. So were a ton of people. The point is what he thinks now.
With anything. It could be like the KGB got him. No, wait, the Turks got him. I mean, look, there are real instances of people actually getting corrupted by communism. Like there are instances of Stalin corrupting the church and stuff. Yeah, he did definitely try to destroy the church and corrupt it. That's true. But not everybody on earth is a CIA agent. So maybe you should track where the U.S. aid is going, and then that's who's a CIA agent, if you ask me.
You're the CIA agent. Kidding.
Yeah, there you go. We have our friend Ahmed here from the archipelago. How's it going?
Hi. So I didn't quite catch the stream. I'm just gonna ask this one thing, and then I'll watch later. So, hello, am I audible?
Yeah, I'm just doing that. Go ahead.
All right. So I want to ask about what you always say. We need to be loving to our personal enemy, and we need to be hostile and actively fight and defend against God's enemies. Well, my question would be, how far can you go with having a personal enemy then? Are we not supposed to have personal enemies at all? Do we just have to, I mean, if we have personal reasons to have personal enemy, like maybe business, maybe war or politics even, how far can you go against them? Can you be defeating them but not physically harm them and not kill them? How does that work?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. First of all, when it comes to enemies of God, there is still distinction in that. So an enemy of God, somebody who's against God, is a little different than just some ignorant person on the other side of the world who's not doing anything. So when we say fight the enemies of God, it means people are actively trying to destroy our church. So people are trying to destroy the church, or they're like invading an Orthodox country and they're trying to hurt people. That kind of stuff is enemies of God. For example, you want to know an example of a human being who is an enemy of God in our eyes would be Rabbi Tovia Singer. He's an enemy of God. He's not my neighbor. I don't have to be nice to him. He says blasphemous things about our religion, and he's trying to destroy all of the Christian churches. But of course, he doesn't love Orthodoxy any more than the others. So yeah, he would be a problem. But as for a personal enemy, there are a lot of moments in the Bible where people disagree with each other, even though they're on the same side in terms of theology. So there's times where Peter and Paul argue and debate and fight, and St. James fights with them as well. And there's times when prophets disagree with kings in the Old Testament. So what you can't do is you can't just go, oh, hey, this guy made me mad, I can murder him. Because as it says in the book of Genesis, spilling the blood of man renders the payment of the blood of man. So basically, if you murder, and again, murder is different than the word kill. So killing in actual self-defense or warfare is a lot different than murder. But if you murder an innocent person because you're angry, like, hey, this guy ripped me off, he stole $5 from my wallet, you go and murder him, the death sentence would be applied to you. Even if you think you're in the right, like, hey, this guy stole, $5 from me, I should be able to decapitate him. You can't. So the law that's prescribed in the Old Testament, even before Moses comes along, is that people who murder unjustly, they themselves get executed. That's how it worked back then. And if you're saying, oh, well, that's Old Testament, so that's not relevant today. The Coptic Church, I'll read to you their answer. They're Oriental Orthodox. They say right here, this is Bishop Yusuf's answer on cops.org. Our Coptic Church approves of fair capital punishment. God himself instituted capital punishment and gave us the reason why he did. We read in the Holy Book of Genesis, chapter 9, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for the image of God he made man. There's a lot more to it, but I'm not going to read it all. But anyway, so for personal enemies, you cannot, run around murdering them, but you can oppose them. You can disagree with them. If somebody is, for example, an Orthodox Christian and you're an Orthodox Christian, but they break into your house and they try to, kill you and your family, yes, you can self-defend. You can fight them. And if you might accidentally kill them in the process, you wouldn't be declared guilty for that because you're defending your own family. So there are times it's like, okay, personal enemy stuff, you have to be loving to them. Not if they're trying to kill you, obviously. But you do your very best to be as cordial as you can. I'm going to let Ahmed back on because he fell off. Welcome back. What was the last thing you heard?
Something about, yes, you can defend yourself from a fellow Orthodox if they break into your house, even if you accidentally kill them.
No, if they're trying to harm you and kill you and you accidentally kill them in the process, yeah, that wouldn't be an example where you're going, far and above beyond the loving your neighbor, because that neighbor is now doing evil to you. And as it says in the Torah, even if you're an Israelite, if you go and murder an Israelite, you're guilty of murder. Now you have to be put to death. So doing things against the law is in its own self going against what God has said. So if God says don't murder, and you say, well, I'm Orthodox, I'm going to go murder. Well, even if you are Orthodox, you're now against God because you're doing something he told you not to do. So I think that's the best way to understand it.
All right. Thank you for the answer.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for calling in. Let me answer a super chat by HC. He says, $4.99 USD. Thank you very much. Some historians claim the first Christians and apostles were Nazarenes/Ebionites. What's the best argument that they were not Nazarenes, Ebionites, and they were Orthodox? Yeah, great question. So the Nazarenes and the Ebionites are nothing alike, just to say. All right, HC. So I know you put the slash there because like people lump them in together. But the Nazarenes and the Ebionites were not anything alike. The Ebionites were more like Islam. They did not believe in the pre-existence of Christ. They held to the law in some way, but they abrogated parts of it. And they rejected the continuity of the church. And they rejected the vast majority of the New Testament, and they don't like the Apostle Paul. Whereas the Nazarenes would accept Paul as a saint. They basically kept the same New Testament, except instead of 4 separate gospels, they might have had one gospel that was the 4 of them combined. They did the law of Moses, and they may have been Trinitarian or may have been semi-Arian. It depends on the time period. Now, as for that, before we get into like the 400s, 500s, and the Nazarenes kind of disappear into other groups that find their way into Italy and other parts of Europe, the Orthodox Church does say that the group that went to Pella, which is in Jordan, that's the same group that the historians claim to be the Nazarenes, that was the original Jerusalem church, and they were fleeing the pagan Romans. So actually, the Orthodox Church and the Nazarenes would agree that that group was holy and pure, and they fled to Jordan to escape the pagan Romans. So as a matter of fact, there actually isn't a disagreement with them on who that first group was. The disagreements come later because the Nazarenes don't accept the ecumenical councils. You have to get into a whole debate about, are the councils correct? Are the church fathers correct? Because the Nazarenes would not accept any church fathers. They might reference them, but there is no church fathers. There is no systematic patristic theology. There is no ecumenical councils. There's none of that. So basically a Nazarene and an Orthodox would start at the same point, which is that the Jerusalem church was righteous and they fled to Pella. But then from then they disappear into different groups where the Nazarenes stay on the outer fringe. They're not quite Christians, but they're not Jews either. And the Orthodox would just end up being part of the great church that foments the first councils. So thank you very much for that question. Yeah, I don't know why you guys are debating about papacy, but that's that. Let me see if we have any other calls. With Solid Snake.
Okay, I'll log out from here to add more people in. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Solid, I don't think you're going to be able to talk because I can't see your audio here. You have to come back on Mozilla Firefox or Chrome. It's the only websites that work here. So please come back on those. We will wait a couple minutes for you because, you waited a while. Yeah. Let me get rid of the share screen for a moment. So yeah, Solid Snake, please come back. 5 USD, Orthodox Centurion. Thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jim, I have a genuine question. What if your next door neighbor is an enemy of God? What should one do? Well, as it states in the Old Testament, and as it states in the New Testament, you have to focus on your own holiness first, number 1. Number 2, it depends on the level of evil they're doing. The Old Testament moral system is very replete on what you're supposed to do. So if somebody's committing murder, tormenting a defenseless animal or a human being, you should get involved by calling the police or something. Now, St. Paul says that if we live in a pagan government, we have to at least be somewhat civil and accept their laws while we're minorities so that we don't cause public mischief and then people get turned off from our religion. So if you live in secular United States of America and your neighbor is a Buddhist, even though they're doing idolatry, you can't do something that would force you to go to prison and then ruin the way that you're supposed to support your family. St. Paul says you have to support your family, and anybody who doesn't do that, as long as they're not a monastic or a priest or something, shame to them. So you have to play by the rules of the life that you're in. Ideally, if you're walking down the street and an idol is sitting there, you should destroy it. But going into somebody's house and breaking the law, you're going to get punished by the law. And St. Paul says not to foment violent revolution where millions of people die just because you don't like the laws. So ideally, you should be trying to make that country more Christian rather than just starting, laws of crimes of passion and vigilante justice. But yeah, stuff like murder and other things which are inexcusable, you do have to report that kind of stuff. And thanks for the donation.
So,
hey, Solid Snake, how's it going?
good. How about you?
I'm doing well. What would you like to discuss today?
Yeah. So relating to the old believers, I had this conversation with a few of them, and I asked them, so if you have a Greek Eastern Orthodox, because usually I see a lot of them criticizing Bartholomew for some comment or Kirill.
Yeah.
I don't see how one can reconcile or come to true Orthodox Church if we don't even live near one, or the average person doesn't.
Yeah, so that's one problem. Another problem would definitely be what we discussed, both Crooks and I and Father Swade on, which is the purity spiral stuff. So just saying like, hey, they're the more pure ones, so we have to do what's going on here. We have to do whatever is the most pure. I mean, it's like, where does the most pure stop? Why don't we just go back to Second Temple Judaism or Mount Sinai Judaism? So I've always had a problem with the purity spiraling, but I do agree with you. Like, what would a Greek have to do? Because there's no old believer there. So would they just be heretics? Would anybody outside of Russia be a heretic, especially if they're not an old believer? I mean, it's a really, really small group. So that would be a massive problem.
Well, another thing I also see is like, you're kind of like just left up to God to save you based on circumstance by that logic. And even Peter says that we're supposed to pray for our hierarchs, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure how we could like even reconcile that.
I think it's just nonsensical. Maybe they had a point back in like the 1700s that they were afraid of there being too many accretions from the Latin side coming in. But, like Father Swadon said, there were some benefits to the so-called captivity because it allowed Orthodox to respond to the Catholics using the language of Latin. It's like this fear of, we can never develop stuff, we can never learn new things. That's not Orthodox, but what Orthodoxy is against is developing on sacred doctrine and just changing dogma and just evolving with the times, which is not what the Orthodox did. They just saw that, hey, now we can read these Latin sources, we should use our theology and argue against the Catholics that way. That's not developing dogma. That's just taking advantage of the circumstance that you're in. So that's the problem. Like, if you just live in a bubble, what if the Catholics come up with like 10 million new arguments and you can't answer them because you've just been, in like a marshland your whole life doing nothing? So that's the problem with the purity spiral.
Yeah, and another thing that I noticed, like with some Americans, is like they come to Orthodoxy for the wrong reasons. In terms of like, they want to like escape this whole like Protestant presupposition,
Yeah.
and come into Orthodoxy just based on a moral high ground rather than trying to embrace spirituality and the fullness of the faith.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you just focus on just pure arguments, pure logic, and pure moral high ground stuff, then you failed already. Because even if you prove Orthodoxy, you've already lost. Because Orthodoxy is not supposed to be, it's not like you can't ever win a logical argument in Orthodoxy. But again, the point's supposed to be a lived-in faith. And so you're not supposed to be running around beating people at Aristotelian metaphysics. You can't put the metaphysical cart before the horse here. And so the spiritual life is very important. That's why we have such a problem with like Barlaam and St. Gregory Palamas. Like, the whole thing is not about metaphysics, even though they get into that. The whole thing's about, do you actually encounter God in life, or is this all just kind of like we're in like the void and we're waiting? We got to study for 20 hours a day just to get a glimpse of a tiny little speck of the divine or something. So that's the difference between the highly scholastic method and then the Orthodox method. So I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. With Protestants in America, it's interesting because a lot of them are like, they'll be against formal Protestant theology, but then the way they argue is still Protestant. Be like, you know what? Anything Protestant sucks, so I'm not going to believe in anything St. Augustine says anymore. And I'm just going to come at this using presuppositional sorcery and stuff. And, Orthodoxy, again, is supposed to be about revelation, not about tricking people and using magic. I'm making fun of it, like magic and warlocks and stuff. What I mean is, like, it's not supposed to be a super philosophical thing. And people read the Church Fathers, the patristics, and they go, they're talking kind of like they're using Greek language like the Neoplatonists. That means Neoplatonism is kosher to argue with, and it's not. But they live in that time period, so they have to respond in that Greek. It's like, I got to talk in English because I live in Chicago, and they had to speak that language. But they're very, very careful to say, we can't accept all this stuff about philosophy, and we can't accept the religions of these philosophers. So that's the problem there, and that's why I think there's also a problem with people who are too obsessed with the like logos theology stuff. Like, Plato was this like prophet of God. I don't agree with any of that.
Yeah, I kind of like touched on that when I responded to one of your comments on X. I'm like, well, I came from a Mormon background, so it's not really hard for me personally to like reconcile the fact that we venerate the Theotokos or venerate icons, but for a Protestant to come in with these presuppositions, I don't understand why it's so hard for them to accept this, even though it's historically accurate.
Yeah, again, a lot of people, I think, are starting to understand that there's issues with just making everything overly philosophical. I'm just going to read a comment real quick. We've got Batman Beyond says, unrelated, I was dating the Muslimin who said that Jesus said to God the Father, glorify me with the glory I had before the world was created, was consistent with him being a prophet because souls pre-existed before creation. Yeah, a lot of Muslims do believe in that, which is total jibber-jabber nonsense. Souls do not exist before creation. You're not in God's womb. You're not in heaven. You didn't come down from heaven. You didn't lose your memories. Your soul is created at conception, and it's a part of you. It's not the real you. It's a part of you. So I find that to be laughably ridiculous. But yeah, I do want to thank you for coming in, Solid Snake. I'm probably going to close out in 2 minutes. Mr. Crooks, you have anything to add so far?
Nope. So far, so good. Just you're a Metal Gear Solid fan, right, Solid Snake?
Yep.
Amazing.
All right, guys. That's a great note to leave it off on. Thank you, everyone, for calling in. Let me read the last chat we've got. What we got here? HC. I'm confused about the Nazarenes. Thanks again for the donation, by the way. Were they the original church, and were they part of Orthodoxy? The split. Jerome seems to speak against some things. Okay. Well, I think I did answer the question earlier when I said that the Orthodox Church acknowledges that the original group that went to Jerusalem and accepted this Nazarene, religion, what they called themselves Nazarenes or not, doesn't really matter so much. If you read the commentary of the official Orthodox Study Bible on the Book of Revelation, okay, when it says that they went into the wilderness, they agree with the Nazarenes, who also agree on this eschatological prophecy, that was them. The Jerusalem church went to Pella to escape the wrath of the pagan Gentiles. That is true, so we accept that. Jerome, unfortunately, is a little wrong on the law. I already said this before. It's in my book, HC. I'm going to find you, because you were so nice to donate. Where is it? Jerome. No. I'm trying to find this for you. Yeah. Okay, here. So if you read St. Augustine, it's called Letter 82 from Augustine to Jerome, AD 405. He says, as touching the Gentiles which have believed, we have written and included they observe no such thing, save only they keep themselves from things offered to idols, etc. He's quoting Acts. It is, in my opinion, very clear that the reason why James gave this advice was that the falsity of what they had heard concerning him might be known to those Jews who, though they had believed in Christ, were jealous for the honor of the law and would not have thought that the institutions which had been given by Moses to their fathers were condemned by the doctrine of Christ, as if they were profane, and had not been originally given by divine authority. For the men who had brought this reproach against Paul were not those who understood the right spirit in which observance of these ceremonies should be practiced under the Christian dispensation by believing Jews, namely, as a way of declaring the divine authority of these rites and their holy use in the prophetic dispensation, and not as a means of obtaining salvation, which was to them already revealed in Christ and ministered by baptism. On the contrary, the men who had spread abroad this report against the apostle were those who would have these rites observed, as if without their observance there would be no salvation to those who believed the gospel. For these false teachers had found him to be a most zealous preacher of free grace and a most decided opponent of their views, teaching as he did, the men are not justified by these things, but by the grace of Jesus Christ, which these ceremonies of the law were appointed to foreshadow. This partly, therefore, endeavoring to raise odium and persecution against him, charged him with being an enemy of the law and of divine institutions, and there was no more fitting a way in which he could turn aside the odium caused by this false accusation than by himself celebrating those rites, which he was supposed to condemn as profane, and thus showing that on the one hand the Jews were not to be debarred from them as if they were unlawful, and on the other hand, that the Gentiles were not to be compelled to observe them as if they were necessary. Bing, bam, boom. All right. The antinomian has been destroyed. So, what did all of that mean? Basically means that St. Augustine is proving the exact thing that I proved in my videos 1,000 times over and in my book, The Misunderstood Bible, 2nd edition. You can find that quote there in the book, that essentially he's disagreeing with Jerome and saying, hey, Jerome, the reason that James and the council are making these decrees and the reason that Paul is having trouble with the Pharisees is because the Pharisees thought without the law, if you don't do any of the aspects of the law, end of story, you can never be saved, meaning that the works of the law can amount to righteousness and salvation. So Paul was saying the law doesn't have to do with salvation. It comes from the free grace given by Jesus Christ. You can't use the law to manipulate God and change his mind into allowing you salvation or something. But at the same time, Paul was saying the law is not 100% gone. It's not replete. You may still do the law. It's good for morality on this earth. So St. Augustine is saying, hey, Jerome, you're not supposed to be totally anti-law. We just don't do it for salvation. So where do we get our morality from? It's from the law, right? There's not a book like Leviticus found that much in the New Testament. So we have to refer to the law many times. So there you go. That's it. Anyway, thank you very much. I don't know what you guys are debating about. That's it. For those of you just joined, talked about the historicity of Orthodoxy in Russia, mainly from the 1400s and onwards. Patriarch Kirill, Vladimir Putin, situation with Ukraine, Latinization efforts, Latin captivity mentioned in Russia and Greece, and then many other things as well. So we are going to cover Orthodoxy in Greece, Orthodoxy in Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia as well, many other episodes to come. So thank you guys very much, and I will talk to you another time, and that's it.
Freakiness is a part of life. Original Baramongan along with the two bad, wicked youths of rap. Not a mercy, whoa.
What's the business? Talk paper when I'm riding by. They know it's drizzle, he the truth off the east side. I know who ain't got my money because they ducking high. I grind for me and mine. I got the green light. I got to get it how I live it. That means front line. I got them zips, I got that soft.